Basu Godin Notebook. 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 Hello, everybody. Welcome to the BasuandGodin Notebook. We're October 21st. The Monday episode, which means that later on today we will have the Monday Mailbag. Arpin, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good. Just want to locate us for our listeners and viewers. I am in the media lounge of the Bell Center. You are in the Salon des Anciens.
Yeah,
Canadians were gracious enough to give us permission to record in the alumni lounge at the Bell Center, and so you got the better background. Who you got in the background there?
So two former captains, the great Jimmy Gardner, captain from 1913 to 1915, and then Billy Coutu, captain during the 1925-26 season. So obviously, I picked the biggest names around.
Yes.
Or alternatively, it might have been just that I got to where the power supply was the closest.
Right. Which is close to the wall, which is why they're so much older. So anyhow, we wanted to. So the Canadiens just finished practice. They have a pretty late week. You know, they play the Rangers on Tuesday, and then they don't play again until Saturday. We sent an email out. We should mention this to our founding members. There's the founding member tier that you can subscribe to the podcast with, and we're going to be doing our first Google Meet with them on Thursday. So if you're a founding member, you're listening to the podcast, you didn't get the email, check your email and see if. But we're going to do our first Google Meet on Thursday evening with anyone who chooses the founding tier of the BasuandGodin notebook on Substack. And so looking forward to that. But right now, I think generally speaking at this stage, early stage of the season, the Canadiens are not quite where they hoped they would be. I think that's obvious. The top line, Nick Suzuki's top line, is producing points, but I think all of them, maybe with the exception of Cole Caulfield, but definitely Nick Suzuki and Juraj Slafkovsky have left a little something to be desired in their overall play. Nick Suzuki spoke at length about that today after practice, how he's not 100% satisfied with how he's playing. Juraj Slafkovsky wasn't even at practice, so he's clearly nursing whatever it is, that shoulder issue that bothered him at practice, which did not keep him out of the game on Saturday, but it's clearly something. It's clearly a thing because he didn't practice on Monday, and it was interesting to see Kirby Dach take his place on that line in the absence of Slafkovsky, which you generally don't do if you're not considering. Generally, you put a placeholder there. In this case, it would probably be Michael Pizzetta or whoever is looking like they won't play on Tuesday. Today, Marty decided to put Kirby Dach there, because that line is really not working. They haven't scored a goal with all three of them on the ice all season. I think Alex Newhook has the lone goal that he's got came at the very end of a power play or just after a power play expired, if I'm not mistaken. So that's an issue. And, the reality is the Canadiens don't really have the personnel to withstand a slump in their top six. And so, what I find interesting about where the Canadiens are at, and I'd like to hear you on this because, you asked the question to Martin St. Louis after practice today. You're dead last in expected goals against per 60. You're dead last in high danger chances against per 60. What's going on there, basically, paraphrasing your question. And he immediately pointed to their lack of time spent in the offensive zone. You talked to Nick Suzuki after practice, and he talked about their inability to kill plays in the defensive zone and how that's affecting their ability to be a more play-driving line than they've been. So it just goes to show how everything is connected. And when Martin St. Louis uses the word, I think we're playing connected. I mean, that's not necessarily what he means, but there's a disconnection.
Disconnected. Yeah,
there's a disconnection here. There really is. And so it's interesting to me how they're going to solve it, because it seems like these are foundational issues. These are really kind of profound, system-based, concept-based, whatever term you structure-based, whatever term you want to use. But these are not only about the players, these issues that we're bringing up. This is a coaching and a playing issue. And so I thought Martin was pretty honest about it after practice today, that he's not satisfied either.
No, and regarding the expected goals, I mean the Canadians are dead last in the league in expected goal percentage. I went to see if it had been affected by their game specifically in Boston, where they gave up 17 high danger chances against.
Mm.
Last year, they gave on average slightly below 10 high danger chances against per game, but even they remain last in the league, even if you discount the first two games of the season. So it's been chronic since the beginning of the season, and you cannot isolate one part of puck management and say, well, it's only in their D zone where they have issues, or only in defensive zone. It's really a free flowing issue, and Marty said that basically for him, it starts with the way that they manage the puck in the offensive zone, the fact that they turn the puck over at the offensive blue line, and that they make poor decisions. And too often, he said, they started the other team's offense. So when you feed the other team's transition, of course they're going to arrive in your own territory with speed, with numbers, and they're going to put you on your heels. And that often, and more often than not, it can create extended shifts in the defensive zone. So when Suzuki was interesting today, when he talked about that specific aspect of the issues with his own line, I mean, you look individually, I think that Caulfield has been like a silver lining. Obviously, 6 goals so far this season. That's great. He's shooting at 30%. It's not sustainable, but when you are a career 16% shooter, there will be times where you'll be reaching those 30%. So he's in one of those stretches right now. I think that it helps keeping that line above water and feeling not nearly as bad about themselves that they would if it was not for those goals. But I mean, Suzuki has been struggling driving the offense for that line. Marty St. Louis thinks that there's an issue with Suzuki's pace, or at least he says that he's more effective driving the play when he plays with more pace. And so right now it doesn't seem to be the case. And as for Slafkovsky, you got to wonder. He decided not to join the Slovakian team in their effort for the Olympic qualifier. That was in late August, turning of September, late August, early September. And he chose to do that just to nurse his back and just to make sure that he would be ready to withstand the rigors of an NHL season with the back as it was, the way it was back then. So I wonder, because it's not the sort of injury that you can nurse overnight, if that's another issue maybe that he's been carrying so far. But I look at the way that, Slafkovsky, I feel like offensively has been even less effective than Suzuki. But he tried to compensate by remaining physical. He's the one who's got the most hits on the team so far. He's been blocking shots too. I think he's the forward that's got the most block shots on the Canadiens. So he's been using his body. So for a guy who might not be 100%, I think that he's trying the best he can to find other ways to be effective. But the reality is that both lines, both the Suzuki line and the Doc line, have been pinned in their own end way too often. And Suzuki's line, I mean, it has happened, but I feel like it has not always translated into big quality chances for the opponent. But when you were discussing that with him earlier today, and I'll leave you continuing on that, but he said that their line, he thinks that they're probably not reading plays fast enough, and they struggle to kill plays quickly. So that's probably an issue. If you cannot, if you lose your board battles and you get also in a situation where you watch your teammate hoping that he'll kill the play for you, and you're just waiting to get back on offense, that will also contribute to extended defensive shifts.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to be clear, like the numbers for Nick Suzuki for the top two lines are quite atrocious. I mean, on many levels. But if you just want to look at expected goals, as a rate stat, the three players in the NHL who have played at least 50 minutes at 5-on-5 this season, the three highest on ice expected goals against per 60 numbers are Alex Newhook at 5.11, Kirby Dach at 5.07, and Nick Suzuki at 4.99. It's early. It's not the end of the world, but those are the NHL leaders in expected goals against per 60 at 5-on-5. In terms of expected goals for percentage, Suzuki is sixth worst in the league among players who have played at least 50 minutes so far. So, this is not, but the goals are even. They've been on the ice for 6 goals for and 6 goals against, largely because Cole Caulfield's shooting the lights out right now. But it's masking, as you mentioned, and as Nick himself mentioned, this inability to get out of their zone, spending way too much time in their defensive zone, and so Nick mentioned that it's the reads that are a little off, and yes, there are areas of the ice as we've discussed in the hybrid system below the hash marks where the system calls for the Canadians to be very aggressive in killing plays, but Nick kind of specified that area of the ice is generally the defensemen who have to make that read. And the defensemen have not been doing a good job of doing that, let's be clear. But other areas of the ice, it falls largely on him as a centerman. Yes, the wingers have to win board battles, but generally speaking, it is his read to make on when to go kill a play aggressively. And one thing I thought that Marty St. Louis said that was interesting is that he finds that often his team is in good position, but they're just satisfied being in good position. They don't have that killer instinct to go kill the play and be aggressive about it. So, these are things that need to be worked out, but, we talk about process versus results. I think Martin, before the game against the Islanders, mentioned that they're in a transition phase towards worrying more about the results than they have in the past, at least. Not necessarily more than process, but more than before. Well, this is part of that transition. This is where, and Marty always talks about being truthful. He said it again today. You have to be able to evaluate with the truth, and the truth is that neither of these lines are working. And so we'll see what happens tomorrow. As we mentioned, Kirby Dach practiced on Nick Suzuki's left wing today, or right wing, sorry, but with Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki. That's a possibility that should be there, even if Slafkovsky's able to go. Like, I thought that they should put Slafkovsky back with Dach, see if that can spark something, and put Newhook back with Suzuki and Caulfield, even though that makes for a bit of a smaller line.
Yeah.
But they did have some success last season when, before Newhook got the high ankle sprain, that line was going well and Newhook was starting to produce. But something's got to give. I mean, the thing about, if the Canadians had no expectations, I think Martin St. Louis would be somewhat justified in being patient with this whole situation and let it play out a bit and bank on the much larger sample size of games from last season where the Suzuki line worked. But they do have some expectations. They don't really have they don't have expectations for this season that would lead them to make sort of short-term solutions. But they still have. So if you do want to compete for a playoff spot, you got to fix things quickly as soon as they come up. And right now, through 6 games, the Suzuki line has not been good enough. The Dach line has not been good enough. So switching that up, today Oliver Kapanen stepped in on the Dach line. I thought I saw him at center. I saw you tweet out that you saw him on the wing and Newhook at center. But either way, I would put Kapanen at center. But either way, that's an interesting infusion of a guy who's played well in limited minutes. Emil Heineman is another possibility to throw into that top 6 mix. Yoel Armia has been fine, I guess, but that's kind of who he is. And I think there was some question of whether his game would translate to a top 6 role. I would argue it hasn't so far. but there's no problem putting Yoel Armia back on let's say the Christian Dvorak line, which is the fourth line right now, and that wouldn't be an issue. But I think the two kids in their limited minutes have shown an ability to be difference makers offensively in certain situations. Be worth exploring that, and see, because you can't continue this way. The top six can't just be defending all the time, which is basically what they're doing right now. So yes, there are tactical things and that you can explain that could change that, but at a certain point, you can talk tactics all you want, and systems all you want, and concepts all you want. Coach has to not to use a word that Martin doesn't like, but has to be proactive about things and just
No,
switch up.
He didn't like that word the other day.
Oh no, he did not one bit.
No.
But that's fine. That's part of the game, and so that's fine. But this is what I've been talking about with proactivity. Is not, I think his notion of being proactive is instructing players and coaching. But to us, what looks proactive, and maybe he disagrees with that definition of it, but to me, something proactive is making a tangible change to your lineup that will lead to tangible differences. And the whole thing about the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, I'm not saying we're at that point yet after 6 games, but these games, the one thing you wouldn't want if you're Martin St. Louis is, let's say you get to April and you're somehow within striking. You're the Philadelphia Flyers from last year. You're within striking distance of the playoffs, and you think back to now, and man, I wish I would have done something about my top 2 lines, and we could have banked a couple more points back then that we could use right now. That's kind of where the Canadiens are at. If you can't just say you want to be in the mix and then just sit back and watch something that's clearly not working and not do anything about it.
No, but I think that in the long run, they trust the first line that's currently set up. And I think that Caulfield, Suzuki, and Slavkovsky like to play with each other. But that doesn't mean that for a while you cannot just shake things up, give the opportunity to each guy individually to find their game just by mixing things up. And at some point you go back to your preferred setup. And that's true also for Doc. I mean, Doc has been... He's struggled on the face-off circle, and he's playing with Newhook, who has not been much better. So maybe that making him a winger for a little bit could be interesting. We'll see if Slavkovsky's there. I could see Slavkovsky with playing with either with Newhook and Armia or Newhook and Kapanen. But where I differ a little bit with you is that when you said it'd be nice to give a chance to Kapanen or Heineman, I agree that they've been very good so far. But it's if you want to transition towards results, you have to put the onus on your best guys to perform and give them at least the chance to figure things out. And you cannot necessarily turn to the rookies to say, oh, well, right now you're doing better, so you're going to be asked to bail the main guys out.
Yeah, but back at training camp, did you not have a question that Yoel Armia could be a top 6 forward?
Yeah.
I think that's a legitimate... It's been a question from the moment we saw that he was probably going to get the Patrick Laine role.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing it that's why I mentioned that, because Armia would be perfectly fine and perfectly comfortable playing a fourth line role and playing fourth line minutes, continuing to excel on the penalty kill, and just doing that. But he's not. That's
Sure.
why there's just an avenue there to give one of those kids a chance, because it's not like you're demoting Slavkovsky or Doc or Newhook. You'd be demoting Yoel Armia, who is probably best suited for a bottom 6 role anyway.
Yeah, it's probably less pressure for him. But it goes to show how you can quickly run out of alternatives, and that's also part of the issue of hoping that your team can contend for a playoff spot. If losing an element like Patrick Laine puts you in a situation where when you want to mix things up, you feel like you're already one man short, it's a problem.
We should also not forget that there's an option in Laval. There's an option in
And
Joshua Roy and Laval if you're trying to get the top six guy in. And, talking to Pascal Vincent about him, he was like, I get the impression that he's not a guy, he needs to play in a top six role
yeah,
to be at his best. And so it wouldn't be crazy, even though they cut him out of training camp, it wouldn't be a crazy thing for them to say, okay, message sent. Now here's a chance. Come in and get it done. Here's a chance. We have a spot on our top six. We see you as a future top six forward. Let's see what you can do. Now he hasn't. He had a great game. He had one great game on the weekend where he got 3 points. He had 6 shots on goal. Didn't produce in the second game, but still, I mean, it's coming along. Maybe he's an option too.
yeah, but that would mean sending somebody down, and who you send down if to make room for a guy that you.
No, they got a room for an extra guy.
They got. Because they did not. Yeah,
they never called anyone up when they sent Quad down, so they're fine.
So I didn't necessarily plan to talk about this today, but with Joshua Roy, there's been a bit of a story over the weekend.
Yeah, the signing. Yeah. I don't really know what happened there, so I'm not really comfortable talking about it. But I think his agent went on the radio to say he didn't know the date, which is not great because there's promotional material with the date out there. So it's
it's a bit weird. It's a bit weird, but I mean, for an event like that where you're signing autographs and you're not showing up, that it angered some people. I don't know if Josh spoke in Laval today, but because we're at the Bell Center, we're not in Laval, so I'll see later on. But anyway, Kapanen has played well enough to earn that sort of short-term stint on the top two lines. Heineman too, for that matter. But my point is, you got to look at your better guys to figure things out.
Yeah.
And and the other thing is that I think that Josh Anderson could have been an option to be promoted to the second line, but things are going so well for his line.
I wouldn't touch him.
Yeah, and I think that the fact that they're playing that same north-south game, we spoke at length over the past couple of years how Gallagher and Anderson seem to be like the two biggest challenges for Marty St. Louis in trying to integrate the concepts that he wanted to establish on his team, because with the way that their playing style did not necessarily call for, being too creative, east-west basically, and using space in a too complex way. They're comfortable when they're playing a north-south game, and Marty said that they've integrated some of the concepts in balancing the ice basically, and making sure at least that they're spread enough that they cover all areas of the ice, and they're well balanced on the ice. So that's something that has enabled that line to be effective both offensively and defensively. But they're playing to their strengths, and it's interesting that within a team that's trying to identify their identity or establish their identity and create a habit out of it, that line, their identity makes no mistake. It's obvious for everybody to see. And when it works so well, and when you have a guy like Jake Evans who's showing more comfort holding on to the puck and making plays probably than ever before in his career, it's working. So yeah, leave it at that. I would have been tempted because to give Anderson to one of the top two lines because he's playing so well. But in second thought, why mess with what's the only lines probably that's working really well for them now.
Well, I mean, I think this is the issue, right? Like Marty was asked a question today about, development when you're looking for more results. And he's like, well, we want to continue to develop. I mean, this is where your point about getting your best players going, all of the Canadiens' best players are still development cases, Suzuki, even at his age, Caulfield, Slavkovsky, obviously Doc, even Newhook isn't that old. I mean, they're all in this sort of like young veteran transition kind of phase, but they're all players who still need to be improving. And, this is a challenge that they need to get themselves out of, and this is something Suzuki went through it last year. You remember? And I actually asked him about this last week. I was like, hey, remember last year when you came out and you said, I'm like, I just haven't been good enough? Like, was that calculated? Did you kind of do that to like put pressure on yourself? Because he started playing better from that point onward. He's like, no, it wasn't calculated. But like, I just call it like I see it. I can call myself out if I know I'm not playing well. And today after practice, I feel he did that. Like, listen, the room opened and we had like a long list of players that we asked to speak to. And basically there were three guys in the room. Sam Montembeault, who's still getting changed after practice. Lane Hudson, same deal. And standing in his hoodie, undressed, all the equipment's off. He's changed. Standing, waiting to address questions was Nick Suzuki. And basically said it like it was. It just hasn't been good enough. So, this team will go as far as those players will take them. And so, yeah, they need to take ownership of what's going on here. But it's definitely, the process is suffering here. And we haven't even talked about the defense, which is obviously suddenly very young. Cayden Primeau didn't practice on Monday. So I would imagine it's not looking very good for him to play on Tuesday. Mike Matheson missed practice, even though he played on Saturday. But when you add Logan Mailloux onto the team, onto the defense, and, two things, Mailloux played over Jacky. I'm sure they didn't want to put Struble on the right side or Jacky on the right side, which kind of contributed to Mailloux playing in that game against the Islanders. But a young defense gets even younger. And so the question was really good today because they're clearly in a development environment and they're clearly in a development phase, but the results are going to suffer when you're putting out, basically a rookie, two rookies with Hudson, who's almost not playing like a rookie right now, but it's just an imperfect group on defense. And it seems like it's going to be an imperfect group all season, no matter what they do. And that's going to be a challenge for results,
And the youth of that team is not about to change either, because they expect to get better also with the reinforcements that they're going to get next season, maybe later this year, but for sure next season. Mm-hmm. And so there's always going to be more of those young players coming in the pipeline. So you got to make sure that the guys that are getting older and that are occupying important roles now, they improve, because the youth of that team, I see it as something that's going to remain for quite a while. And, I was mentioning Jake Evans a few minutes ago. So he's probably playing the best year of his career, the best season of his career so far. It's a great start to the season. Let's just put it that way. I don't know if it's going to continue, but for discussion's sake, if it were, do you think that it could be a situation where the Canadiens should consider keeping Jake Evans beyond this season, considering that, yes, they've got Oliver Kapanen that they're going to use at center? I suppose that there will be a spot next year once Christian Dvorak is gone. But if you want to let go of Evans and say, not only do we add Kapanen, but we've got a spot for Owen Beck, then your center line is still super young. So you nurture that idea of having a developing team. And when exactly do they intend to open their window if the amount of young players that they would funnel into that roster, keeps being so big? It's okay that it has been so far, and you got a guy like Demidov who would come next year. For sure, they're going to make a spot for him. I have no issue with that. Yeah. But it's just that you've got to at some point you got to say, hold on, we cannot year after year remain so young. And so that's why I wonder, considering the steadiness that Evans provides, the type of responsibilities that he occupies, that maybe not a ton of players can do as well as him, especially defensively on the PK and whatnot. I'm just thinking, is there a world where it would make sense for the Canadiens to hold on to him?
I mean, I would imagine there is. I think there's, the money that's going to come off the books, and everything you said is true, but I think there's definitely a plan to use the freed up money and the draft picks that they've collected to also go out and acquire more veteran type players. So that's going to also provide a mix, a better demographic mix, I guess, in the lineup. But I think if Jake Evans continues going the way he has, listen, he didn't want to talk about it today, but I pointed out in my piece this morning that there are 13 forwards in the NHL who have played at least 15 minutes on the penalty kill at this stage of the season. Only four of those forwards have not been on the ice for a goal against. They are Jake Evans and Yoel Armia, and he would hear none of it and basically shut off the question before I could even finish it. He said, "No, I'm not talking about it. I'm not talking about it." But it's true that Jake Evans has, he played 7 minutes and 13 seconds on the penalty kill on Saturday night alone. But he's up above 20 minutes of ice time this year on the penalty kill, and no goals against. Now, has he been perfect? No, not really. I mean, obviously, goaltending has a lot to do with it, but he's been a highly effective player in that area. That's the second, he's after leading the league in shorthanded ice time last year and putting up pretty good results. So, yeah, he definitely fills a role. Does that mean that they would keep him? I don't know if he's going to play so well that they would undo whatever plan that they have going forward. I mean, the reality is that Beck and Kapanen, to me, I think they both, or maybe even the organization hopes that one of them will emerge as being a player who can play higher up the lineup. But you look at them, they're both really smart, 200-foot right shot centers who can win draws and will eventually be able to kill penalties. And Kapanen's already on the second power play now. So, I mean, it's, they probably see a future where he could play on the power play as well. But Beck has been, has decent offense in his game as well. Really good shot. So, I don't know. And that's what's interesting about the season. When Martin says we're transitioning towards caring about results, well, the roster, the organization itself is transitioning to a different phase where all of these legacy contracts, basically Bergevin's contracts, are coming off the books, and we talk about how well Gallagher and Anderson are playing and how people are dying for when those contracts get off the books. There's 2 more years after this one. But man, where would the Canadians be without those 2 guys? Those 3 guys.
It's not. It's certainly not their. It's not one of their biggest problems right now.
It's not even close. It's the one thing that's not a problem is those 3 guys: Evans, Gallagher, and Anderson. And so it's are they paid too much for what they do? Evans, I would argue no. 1.7 for a third line center who kills penalties and is pretty good. And yes, paying $12 million for Gallagher and Anderson and what they bring offensively is not ideal, but they're off to a great start to the season, and the guys who pull in the money, Suzuki, Caulfield, and as of next season, Slav, are not delivering the mail. So I don't think it's time to panic, though, but it does seem like a shakeup is necessary. So we'll see what happens against the Rangers. We'll see if Slafkovsky plays, but it does strike me as something where something's got to give. It's been 6 games. The dock line has been a black hole. There's been nothing positive about it. I mean, at least the Suzuki line has Caulfield scoring goals, but they're not sustainable goals. They're Caulfield, and actually it's an encouraging sign. Caulfield scoring the goals that he used to score regularly before last season and before his shoulder surgery. I know that there was a big thing about his answer about the shoulder question from our colleague Guillaume Lefrançois, but it was a legitimate question. It's honestly this is what was expected coming out of that surgery. Is it can take 2-3 years to fully be back to yourself, and if he's already kind of feeling back to himself from a shooting perspective, that's good news for him. But they need to do more sustainable actions in the offensive zone that keeps them in the offensive zone for longer, and they're not doing that right now. And so it's Martin always talks about if you do the actions that improve your percentages chance of winning, if you do them repeatedly, then your chances of winning go up. Well, for that line, they need to repeat some actions that lead to sustained offensive zone time. And the trickle down of that would be those defensive metrics improving, the young defense would not be under pressure all the time. And poor Cayden Primeau had to spend a 4-minute shift in his defensive zone. Like,
Yeah.
Carey Price once described that to me as being like, if you want to know what that feels like, do a wall sit for 4 minutes and tell me how your legs feel after. And so I did it once. I didn't make it to 4 minutes, I can tell you that much. So it did not feel good. After 1 minute, it didn't feel good. But that's what Cayden Primeau went through in that interminable shift against the Islanders, where they just could not get out of their end. And to be fair, someone, I forget who, but someone had lost a stick, and so it was a bit of so it was a bit of an odd man situation. But still, that's just an exaggerated example of what happens to this team all the time. And so, I think, not to be overly dramatic, but I just feel like this period, like the game Tuesday, and then a big gap between the games. So depending on how they perform on Tuesday, Marty has time here to fix things. And when he got upset at my proactive question, he said, I am proactive and I'm going to fix it. Or we're going to fix it. I forget which one he used, but anyhow, he gave a guarantee that it'll be fixed. So I thought it was I thought generally it was a step in that direction against the Islanders. It wasn't a bad performance necessarily. It wasn't nearly as bad as what preceded it, but there has to be a little bit more urgency from these guys in terms of turning this around and being a team that's not constantly defending and constantly on its heels and constantly relying on its goaltending to bail it out.
Yeah, but
that was a good Cayden Primeau. Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
The dock line at some point against the Islanders went on the ice, and on 3 straight shifts, the Canadians took a penalty.
Yeah.
3 straight shifts. So it's not just how many high danger scoring chances you give up or whatever. If you're defending, if you're behind the play, if you're playing catch up, you'll be more prone to taking penalties, especially stick penalties like that. So there was Doc himself, a bad
in
penalty
overtime.
late in the no, not that one. The one late in the second period. Then pin in their own end, Mailloux early in the third. I think Mailloux had all of those guys were on the ice for more than a minute and a half. Again, another long shift. And then it was Armia back then as the third straight shift. Not to mention Doc again creating that 3-on-4 situation in overtime. So it's not only they're offensively a black hole, but when you start taking penalties because you're going for the puck and you're behind the play, it's ugly. So something needs to change there. But since you mentioned Cayden Primeau, I want to mention the fact that people were so quick. They jumped the gun on the fact that after one game, oh my God, I've seen enough. He's
Get rid of this guy.
Get rid of this man. He took such a big leap forward last season, for sure and he did not have a great training camp, and for sure that his first game of the season against Boston was not comforting. He was not like oozing confidence for his teammates, but the way that he bounced back after the Islanders' second goal, the whole second half of the game, man, he really helped them staying in that game. On the PK, he was big. He was big during those 4 minutes that they played in their own end. But overall, he got stronger as the game went on. And even though you could say, well, again, on Palmieri's goal, the first of Palmieri, but the second Islanders goal, maybe it's a save that you'd like your goalie to make, just to say, I'm going to make the extra save in order to stabilize things. It would have been nice, but it was such a prime real estate for Palmieri. I mean, any goalie would have struggled to stop that shot. So I won't put him on him. But after that, man, he got really stronger. And overall, I think that he must feel as it's a bounce back performance from him. So at this point, he's still a young goalie who's a backup goalie. And before thinking that he's not worth anything, let's just wait and see how things develop, because you would want to get rid of him and say we're going to replace him with Jakub Dobeš. I'm not sure you'd necessarily be better off.
No.
So I think people need to just breathe through their nostrils and just let things play out a little bit. Primo has agreeably surprised us in the past in the progress that he's able to make, and he's proving that everybody, including us, Arpin, don't know anything about goalie development and whether they're going to pan out or not. I say hi to Charlie Lindgren, by the way.
Charlie Lindgren, yeah. Charlie Lindgren's my guy that proved it to me. Good for you. Cayden Primeau did too, honestly. Like, I really did not think we'd ever see this version of Cayden Primeau at this level. But gotta say, Dobish, I do admit I don't know anything about goalie development, but I like what I see in Dobish. But it's a little too early for him to be playing in the NHL, that's for sure. And Cayden, I think it was important. He mentioned it himself that he wanted to bounce back after the performance in Boston. Everyone could see that was a bad game, but one bad game does not mean you give up on a young goaltender. All right, what do you say we hit the mailbag? Oh, and some fun animation. Let's hit the animation for the mailbag. I'm excited.
We do a mailbag every Monday, you know.
Let's go to the mailbag. Let's go to the mailbag.
Mailbag.
You know, they reach out and they write to us.
All right, so thanks a lot to everybody who sent us their questions on our Substack chat. It's fun because, I mean, we're just getting started here, and you can feel as though there's already a little community forming, so keep them coming. We're very happy with that. We like not only the questions, but also the fact that our listeners and Canadians fans start their own little discussions there. So keep it coming.
Just a note, we did get some questions in our email at the BasuandGodin at gmail.com. We're only taking mailbag questions off the chat in the Substack app. So whether it's on desktop and you go to the Substack website, it's easy. Just look for the word chat, click it, put your question there. On the app, it's very easy. It's just the two squares, kind of interlocking squares. That's the chat symbol on the app. Go there, leave your questions there. We really want to encourage our listeners to go there more often and banter, and we can go bounce back and forth between each other as they have on these mailbag questions. You know, we didn't even put out a call for mailbag questions on the chat, and they started coming in, and that's what we love to see. So keep it up.
Yeah. So Cliff Stefanuck asks us, have either of you heard from anyone in the organization about load management for Lane Hutson? In the last episode, you talked about the grind, and it made me wonder what Marty and management are thinking. Lane is the opposite build of Leo Carlson, and Anaheim load managed him until he got hurt. So I wonder if protecting Lane from the physical demands of the grind is on their radar.
Well, two things on that. So Lane Hutson once was asked, what are you most excited about for your rookie season? This was relatively recently. He said, I'm most excited to play 82 games. I love playing games. This is great. Martin St. Louis was asked about it today. By Stu Cowan, who spent a lot of time of the Gazette, who spent a lot of time talking to Lane, so I imagine it came up with him. But Martin's answer was similar, that when you come out of the NCAA, what you're excited about is playing more games and having less practice. In the NCAA, you practice a lot. You only play on the weekends, basically. So, but one thing he said that was interesting in terms of load management, because he did actually didn't use that term, but did use that concept to say the one thing they want to teach Lane is how to manage his output within games. That there are pockets of games where they can teach him how to conserve energy so that he has everything that he can give at the end when crunch time arrives. So, he didn't say there definitely has been no thought of, proactively keeping Lane Hutson out. There's that word again, keeping him out of the lineup to load manage him. And Marty's didn't sound like that would be something they would entertain, but he does, I think, concede that, Marty's number one quality for Lane Hutson that he loves is that he never takes a shift off. He never takes a rep off, even in practice. I think that answer was kind of like, not that you could take shifts off, but there are moments in games where you can conserve some energy and save it for a more critical moment. So I think if there's any load management done with Lane Hudson, it might take that form.
Yeah, and I think that load management also involves the other players. If you get stuck in your own end and you prolong your shift, then during a game it's taxing, and your body's gonna feel it, and it's not just the goalie; it's going to be any player on the ice. So, we saw against the Islanders a duo, Hudson and Mailloux. Yeah, sure, it's a great thing for the future, and you think of what they could look like playing together in a few years down the road when they're really at their top of their game and the complementary aspects. I agree with that. But what I saw from those two on Saturday was, for all their good intents and their offensive initiatives, I saw the Islanders making sure that those offensive initiatives would not come very often, and they struggle defensively because of that. So you have to have a surrounding cast also that enables him to keep his shifts short, and you have to have also enough depth on the back end to make sure that you don't have to rely exaggerately on Lane Hudson. I mean, the other night last week there was a game where he ended up playing over 30 minutes in his seventh NHL game. These things should not happen. It means that they rely on him all that much, so much right now. They're not going to scratch the kid, considering how crucial and vital he's become already for this team. But you have to have also guys around that are good enough to take away from the pressure that you would want to put on Hudson right from the get-go. Because, it's fun to see that it happens. Once you say, haha, they're over 30 minutes, it's amazing, but they're certainly not going to want to make this a trend, especially further down the road. It's well documented that around January, a lot of NCAA players, they hit the wall and they start to feel it physically. So you've got to protect yourself and protect the player against that. So we'll see. Maybe it seems so far away because of how important he's become to the Canadiens that they could try to reduce his ice time. But let's see if we can have that conversation 2/3 into the season, and if they want to make sure that he doesn't hit the wall. But to me, it's part the player himself that has to learn how to keep his energy and his output. I won't disagree with Marty on that. But it's also, who are the other resources at your disposal to make sure that you don't have to turn to Lane extensively?
Yeah. Next one comes from Kyle Lambert. He asks, what will it take for St. Louis to face some pressure? I'm not suggesting that fans should be calling for his head, but his defensive system has, thus far, been a total failure. While I understand the desire to implement a system to which players adapt, it's obvious that Montreal lacks the personnel to play Marty's defensive scheme effectively. While everything for Marty has been roses thus far, the point at which his bosses question his tactical norms, I think he's trying to say, I think there's a typo there, his tactics cannot be too distant. So thanks for the question, Kyle. I think this is something that we were kind of expecting all season, more or less, like that this was going to kind of be one of the interesting defining elements of this season, is that the standards by which the team, and by extension Martin St. Louis, are judged are going to change. But I think, as we discussed earlier, it's important not to, this is not a veteran team he's coaching, so yes, I think they want to see added results, but it's a young team. And when you asked him the question about being such a young team, what did he say? Well, I don't see it as a disadvantage. I see it as these kids, these players will learn easier because they're so young. And so that's why I think we need to be careful. And that's why I think the organization needs to be careful about setting expectations for the year. And I know that they had meetings about it and they came out with a unified voice, and in the mix was the term they wanted to use. But it's an incredibly young team. They are not at a stage where they can reasonably expect to be competitive in the sense that they should make the playoffs. I think they can reasonably expect to win more games than they have in the recent past. But making the playoffs in this league is really hard. And as we've mentioned many times, so many things needed to go right. But why? Because there's so many question marks around this team, because they're so young. They don't know what they have yet. So I agree with you that Martin St. Louis is going to face some pressure at some point, but you look at the lineup they put out against the Islanders Saturday, it's a young team. It's a lot of young guys, and especially on defense. And so, and a team that plays like the Islanders play, and I think the Canadiens played them pretty well. And I thought Marty after the game was pretty on point. They played a pretty good road game. They managed the game better than they had, and that's progress. So you want to see a young team get out of, self-correct and to me, I'm going to judge Martin St. Louis on that ability, on the ability of this team to self-correct, because this is far from the last slump we're going to see from this team this season. This is far from being the last element of their game that's going to kind of go south. How are they able to correct themselves along the way and while still playing games at a very rapid pace? And that's why earlier I mentioned this is an interesting week for Martin St. Louis, because if they don't figure out this defensive zone stuff and the puck management stuff that he's talking about against the Rangers on Tuesday, then it's kind of on him to make sure that when they take the ice next against St. Louis on Saturday, that these things are settled and he has the time to do it. So I think he's going to start to face some pressure, but it's got to be painted with the bright brush that this is still an incredibly young team, and to expect this team to produce results at the same rate as even an Ottawa or a Detroit, some of these other teams who have been at this longer, I don't think is really reasonable or fair.
The only thing I'll add to that is that when it comes to the defensive system, the way, and the hybrid system more specifically, the players say, we understand what we have to do. It's not like there is confusion in their mind as to what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's confusion in their execution, though.
That's it.
Yeah.
But confusion in the execution, it goes back to what Kyle mentions as personnel, maybe, or certain players have the awareness or the quality of their reads, their hockey IQ that's higher, that enables them to apply that system better than others. But if execution at some point, I don't know where to draw the line, where to say, well, beyond that, execution is on the coach. What's
on the coach is recognizing his players' ability to execute what he's asking them to execute. That's where it falls on the coach. Like if it becomes obvious that his players just can't do it, then it's on him to change and adapt. But I don't think he's reached that point yet because they're so young. It's all a big circle, right? It's kind of like he's going to keep hammering it home a little longer than he would than if he had a veteran group and they weren't able to execute it. Then that's probably a different set of circumstances. When you have young guys who are still kind of malleable and are still learning how to play in the league in general, I think it's easier to justify sticking with a system that you think will work when they're ready to be effective NHL players. It's easy to just chalk it up to youth and that I can teach them how to play this way when the team is so young.
Oh, well, that's what he believes in anyway. So and since he's become head coach, he's gone, just further down this tunnel, or I don't know if it's a tunnel, but further down this road, and say, well, we're just going to apply details more and more and adjust things as we go. But he's puck committed to that system for now. So it's not bound to change in a month from now. It would have to be during the off season. But when he arrived at the golf tournament and said, yeah, well, we expect only to tweak just to only a few things, but we're not going to change a whole lot of stuff. It's those who were hoping that he would let go of the hybrid system and go for a more conventional zone defense. Well, they had their answer right there. And it's not only in Montreal that they're committed, but in Laval, Pascal Vincent has started applying the same hybrid defense that he's discussed with Marty St. Louis during training camp, and they're making sure that what's taught in Laval, well, for the defenders that's going to be promoted to Montreal, they won't be lost, and they're going to, they're simply going to follow the same game plan.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that was not the case with JF Hull last season. Last season they played a man-to-man in Laval, which in the case of so this is actually kind of a perfect example of why this is important. So when Arbor Jacki went down to Laval last year, yes, there were elements of his defensive game that he wanted to work on, and he did, but he was playing this man-to-man system, which is much easier to follow. You have your man and you follow him around everywhere. The thinking element of it was kind of taken away from him, so I guess he could focus on sort of the more physical elements of defending. But that didn't help him play that hybrid system when he came back. Yes, he played much better when he came back, but so I think there's arguments for and against that. You would like to be able to go down to Laval and play the exact system, but at the same time, maybe that helped Arbor focus on defending and the actual act of defending by having that removed from his dossier, I guess, or just basically from his mind. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes this season, but it's definitely a change in Laval from last season.
Yeah. Okay. Mathieu Lacombe says, "Hey guys, I know Kirby Dach is struggling a bit right now, and I think it's important to find ways to help him. But I keep wondering if PP1 could benefit of having both Hudson and Matheson on it instead of Kirby. Is there any NHL formation with a 2 defenders PP1? There's not that many.
No, there's basically only one. Pittsburgh's really the only one that rolls out Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang on PP1. I think there's some teams who occasionally have a second defenseman on there. If you go by ice time, there's a few teams like the Sabres have Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power in their top 5 in power play minutes per game, but the actual units, they're separated. The Lightning have, Taylor Radish of all people and Victor Hedman in their top 5 in power play ice time per game, but they are on separate units. So I think you see it more on PP2, where there's 2 defensemen. I think Boston has Mason Lohrei and Hampus Lindholm, if I'm not mistaken, on their second unit. But it's an interesting debate in the sense that it would make perfect sense to put Lane Hudson on PP1 and maybe take Kirby Dach out, especially with Mailloux here. You have a pretty good option for PP2 with Logan Mailloux in the mix.
That's a good point. Very good point.
Yeah, and Kirby Dach would, in theory, not really the way he's playing right now, but theoretically would beef up that second power play unit to some extent. So I think it's an interesting thought. I'd be surprised if Marty went that route just yet, because the power play is actually doing okay. It's not bad. And Lane Hudson being on power play 2 is really helping that unit be dangerous. So I don't know. They're clicking along at 21-something%. I think they're in the middle of the pack in the league. I think there are a lot of other issues the Canadians need to address before worrying about the power play.
Well, I think that it's not necessarily about as much of the power play as taking something away from Kirby Dach because he's ineffective.
Yeah.
And it's a dangerous road to go down to, because you want, Martin St. Louis is a player's coach, and he knows that he's managing a young roster, a young core, and Kirby Dach is part of that core, and you don't want to lose any of those guys for decisions that are
short-sighted. Yeah.
Short-sighted, and who are at risk of affecting the young player's confidence even more. So he's got to have his finger on the pulse to make sure that if he does a thing like that, it's not going to be taken the wrong way by Dach, or it's going to make him dig into an even deeper hole. So you got to think twice before you do that sort of thing, because if only based on merit, I totally would do that. I would put him on, demote him to PP2, promote Hudson, and bank on the fact that Hudson and Matheson together would probably make that first power play unit even more dangerous. But I think that you have to do it for the right reasons, and it's knowing that how the rest of Doc's game right now is in shambles and needs to be fixed. I mean, if you take this away from him, I'm not sure that it necessarily serves the purpose that you hope to achieve. But we've discussed it in a previous episode, the fact that, down the road, I think that Hudson will eventually play on the top power play unit. But the fact that they've been able to get some production from the second PP is interesting. I'd like them to use Mailloux on the second PP and use that amazing shot that they've got. They've got potentially some very good shooters on the second power play unit. Heineman is showing how good a trigger he's got, so that's another weapon they could use on the power play there. And where you were talking earlier about Armia. Armia's never been. He's okay on the power play, but he's never been like this amazing guy. But they've got some options. But the power play as a whole, and I can't believe I'm saying that because we're in Montreal, and after all, it's the Canadiens. But the power play is not the biggest issue right now.
No, it's not. Okay, one last question, and then we'll call it a show. This comes from Fraser, who's in Calgary. And so he mentions that he read a study that people become lifelong fans at about 7 to 9 years old when they see a team succeed. Not sure it's proven science, but I did become a Roy/Habs fan at 8 years old in 1993. Do either of you recall when/why you became Habs fans? My kids are 4 and 7. I am resigned to the Oilers being my 7-year-old's team, but will the Habs make the final in the next 5 years, presumably holding out hope for the 4-year-old? It's starting to feel like Suzuki and Caulfield will be the second-line vets behind Slav and Demidov by the time this team is ready. So a couple of things here. I think there's one thing that's interesting is that both Marc-Antoine and I were very similar in age. Marc-Antoine's a bit older than I. I like to remind him of that. And but we both became fans watching Matt Snaslin, play on that line with Bobby Smith and that kind of era of Canadiens hockey, just ahead of the 86 Stanley Cup, and coming out of sort of the Guy Lafleur era. But both of our favorite player as a kid was Matt Snaslin on the Canadiens. So that's I guess the when/why. The why, it doesn't really apply. We grew up in Montreal. I mean, that's why you become Habs fans, because you grew up in Montreal and you're a kid and you love hockey. And so that's the player that I guess both of us attached to. Now, in terms of the Habs making the final in the next 5 years, that's a whole other matter. I'm not sure if, I don't want to tell you how to parent, but I think you got to really hammer it into your kids that which team they're supposed to like. I think it's kind of how that works. But obviously, environment's going to be tough. Although you say you're from Calgary and your kid's an Oilers fan, I don't really see how that works. But yeah, will they make a cup final in the next 5 years? Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's possible, I guess. I can't say with any degree of assurance that they will. Let's put it that way. I can't.
Well, there wouldn't be any Maple Leafs fan anymore if that was the logic.
For generations and generations of Torontonians would just hate the Maple Leafs. So yeah, it shouldn't be only about the success. But if I were you, I would look more into your older kid being an Oilers fan, living in Calgary. That's bizarre to me. But yeah, I don't think. But generally speaking, I don't think there's any assurance that the Canadiens have a lot of work to do before you can even see a path to them making not only a Stanley Cup final, but being sort of a consistent contender. They're not even close to that. And I can't even say with any degree of assurance that they have the puzzle pieces in place to do that. So,
well, it's such a long walk across the desert that the whole rebuild thing, that you have to hope that they're going to, at the end of it, that there's going to be that level of competitiveness. Otherwise, what are they doing it for? I'm not sure if they might fall short. A lot of teams that rebuild end up falling short, but they they've got to trust the process, I guess. But I have to mention that because it's really on topic, and I don't see when I would ever be able to tell that anecdote. But there's someone in Montreal that I heard of. He's decided that he would turn his little kid, his son, into a Buffalo Sabres fans.
Nice.
Only by buying him gear and just creating an environment, a bubble around him where it's Buffalo Sabres stuff. And it's strictly an experiment to see if seeing a logo, having the merchandise and whatnot can create.
So he's using his kid as a guinea pig.
Yes.
As a societal experiment guinea pig. That's hilarious.
Yeah. So I think the kid's like 4. And I don't know how long he's going to stick with that, but
it's a little cruel and unusual to pick the Sabres as a test case.
I know, yeah.
A tormented franchise. I mean, honestly, like you talk about the Leafs. I mean, that's another fan base that's been just battered and bruised in its entire existence almost. So, yeah.
I know. He could have picked an easier one, but then again, I guess that it might prove the point that, if you have a kid that emerges and he will never know exactly why he became a Buffalo fan until his father tells him.
That's it. 5 years from now, we should check back in on this case and see how that turned out. But for Fraser and Calgary, I mean, honestly, I don't know. I think I would investigate why your older kids and Oilers. I get it. The Oilers are good, and I guess that kind of proves your point. But I think environment counts for something, and kid growing up in Calgary shouldn't love the Oilers just on principle alone, basically. So that's good or bad.
Yeah. So where I'm older than you, Arpin, is that I remember actually I started following hockey when Mats Naslund was playing with Pierre Mondoux and Mario Tremblay. So
there you go.
Yeah, so that was my life.
I remember that, but it wasn't me. It was really when they became a combination with Bobby Smith that I really got cranked up by it.
Yeah. All right, so thanks a lot for listening to this other episode of the BasuandGodin Notebook. We're going to be back on Friday with our Future Friday segment and with tons of other observations on Montreal Canadiens. You mentioned it, Arpin, a little bit of a lighter schedule, but that's okay. It gives us also more time to chat with the players after lengthy practices. So don't forget to follow us. We've got all sorts of social media channels. So wherever you go for your social media, whether you're more into TikTok, YouTube, obviously Twitter, we've had our Twitter account for a while now, but if you watch us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. It's always useful because it makes it easier for people to find us. And more importantly, we've got still a couple of weeks to go before we turn the paywall on for our Monday episodes. So don't hesitate any further and join all those hundreds of people who have already subscribed to become like paid subscribers to the BasuandGodin Notebook. We're extremely appreciative of that. So thanks a lot for your confidence. I hope you like the show, and we'll talk to you again on Friday.